Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, February 14th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the 2022 United States Senate elections if they were held during the 2018 midterm election year. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is simply because I want to take a little break from the 2022 coverage in its entirety. I will still reference it and still use it as a means for this video, but I want to actually apply it to a different type of national environment. In addition to that, I actually covered the 2018 midterm elections. This channel has been around for nearly 5 years now, and we have been covering elections from 2017 through 2022, and I think it would be interesting to just pretty much apply the 2018 national environment to a 2022 type of map, just to see how much better or maybe how even the Democratic Party would do relative to their expected current performance. To provide a bit of context about what I currently expect for the Senate elections in 2022, I give the Democratic Party 48 Senate seats and the Republican Party 52 following November. That's with the GOP flipping the states of Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, with the Democrats flipping the state of Pennsylvania. The Democrats hold on to the swing states of New Hampshire and Colorado, whereas the Republicans hold on to the swing states of Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. Moving beyond this map, what we are going to see is the same exact Senate map up with just a drastically different national environment. Keep in mind, right now, the GOP maintains a 2 to 3 point advantage nationwide, whereas in 2018, the Democratic Party maintained a 7 to 8 point advantage. The actual results ended up being nearly 8 percentage points nationwide, and it was a very impressive feat. Taking a look at the results from 2018, we do have some of the same states that are up in terms of the election. But you do have to understand that there are different incumbents. There are different candidates here. We are treating this as if we are applying the same people, the same, type of, the same states, just to the 2018 national environment. We will keep into account the slight improvements between then and now in terms of Democratic Party and Republican Party population share, decreased amounts of Democratic votes from the inner cities, from the Rust Belt area, moving into areas across the Sun Belt, such as Atlanta to, Phoenix. Keeping that in mind, that is something that we definitely need to consider, but it isn't going to be make or breaking this map. I think that, generally speaking, we can apply something from 4 years prior and it'd be pretty accurate, if I was to say so myself. So, starting off on our Senate map here, what we are going to find is that in 2018, while there were some competitive seats in North Dakota, in Missouri, and Indiana, we probably aren't going to see that happen again in 2022, even under a 2018 type environment. Those races were only competitive because there was a Democratic incumbent in all of those races, and that simply isn't the case anymore. So we can't count on that type of incumbency advantage to benefit the Democrats in any way. Looking at the map here, we are still going to be seeing some very similar safe states to the current map. We aren't going to see all of a sudden Utah get close because it's 2018, as it didn't. Idaho's not going to get close. Even in 2018, North Dakota with a Democratic incumbent was a victory for the Republicans by 10 percentage points. It simply got too polarized for the Democrats to win in that state, and I think the same thing would happen in this regular election. We're going to leave the state of Kansas as not safe for right now, just for a little bit of discussion. Looking at some of these more statewide races, I will say that I am less inclined to move states such as South Carolina and Indiana and Missouri into the safe column, simply because of the national environment that we are going to be working under, but it definitely is fair game to an extent. Looking at our map here, we have finalized all of these safe Democratic seats and the safe Republican seats. One thing that I would change actually in terms of safe Republican and safe Democratic seats is the state of Colorado. I would move that into the safe Democratic column for right now. I really don't think that the GOP would have much of a chance, especially considering the incumbency status there and also the ability of Colorado to shift over significantly in favor of the Democratic Party. Michael Bennet also one who outpaced Hillary Clinton from 2016, so I would argue that the right type of environment would be there for the Democrats to win in Colorado, and by a pretty substantial margin. I think earlier on in my election predictions, I actually had Colorado as a safe state, and that was when Joe Biden was soaring high. Considering that we aren't going to be working under a Biden presidency in this type of environment, we're simply working under the same thing, same exact thing, just a different map. I would still say the state of Colorado becomes a safe Democratic seat in this situation. So that brings us at 46 safe Democratic seats, 39 safe for the GOP. Again, you might be surprised to see states such as Alaska or Missouri or Indiana or South Carolina or Kansas as, non-safe states, but I would argue that many of them can be characterized as likely states for this scenario. Looking at the states of Missouri, Indiana, South Carolina, Kansas, and Alaska, we have seen them become likely Republican states on the statewide level when it comes down to some key Senate races, even as recently as 2020, right? The state of Alaska was decided by, less than 15 points. The state of Kansas was decided by less than 15 points. The state of South Carolina was decided by less than 15 points. And the 2020 national environment was actually less beneficial for the Democratic Party than the 2018 environment, even though the Democrats won back control of the Senate. And that's because the map was more favored towards them. Now, looking at the remainder of this map, what we are going to find is while the GOP may have been safe in Iowa in my most recent projection, there's a chance that it might not be. Recent polling data does show Chuck Grassley with a pretty substantial lead over the Democratic frontrunner, but that lead is 17 percentage points. Now, keep in mind that 17 percentage points is with a national environment where Joe Biden is disapproved of by 12 points, in the state of Iowa by potentially 20 points. In addition to that, the Republicans are up about 2 to 3 points nationwide. In this scenario, the Democrats would be up by 8 points, and they were up by 8 points in 2018. In 2018, what we saw was that Democrats flipped 2 seats in the House in the state of Iowa and nearly won an additional third, which almost made the state of Iowa have a 4-0 Democratic delegation from that state. In addition to that, there was a governor election that almost went to the Democrats despite there being a Republican incumbent. It was decided by 3 percentage points. So while I don't think the Democrats would win here, I do think that it could narrow down to being likely. Even though Chuck Grassley is popular, his incumbency status seems to have faded by the amount of people who want him to retire. I truly think that 2022 will be the closest Senate race for Chuck Grassley since his first election, which isn't necessarily anything bad because he's had monumental victories ever since then, but it is, in my opinion, the fact that 2022 in this situation would be working under a 2018 type of environment, and with the sheer amount of people who called on him to retire before he announced he was running for re-election, it is possible it narrows up, but I don't think by any stretch that it goes towards the Democratic Party. But I do think that the Democrats would be able to win in the state of Arizona the way they did in 2018. I also think that in the state of Georgia, what we would find is that the Democrats with Raphael Warnock as a stellar candidate, someone who would be the incumbent in this situation, would be able to win re-election. I don't think Mark Kelly and Raphael Warnock would decimate their Republican opponents. Leans are the extent of where I would go in terms of this 2018 type of environment. Stacey Abrams couldn't crack Georgia, but Raphael Warnock would be serving as the incumbent and as someone who had won an election prior to. I also do think that it takes the right type of candidate. At this point in time, looking at the candidates there, Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock, I honestly think Raphael Warnock would have that situation. Brian Kemp was not nearly as much of a celebrity type of personality as a non-politician type personality. I mean, he was literally the Secretary of State at the time, so he had a little bit of a better chance across the state of Georgia. But I do think with an incumbent that really matters a lot. And, looking at how close it was in the governor's race, I wouldn't be surprised if Raphael Warnock, especially being the first black senator from the state of Georgia, him increasing the turnout in addition to what Stacey Abrams was already going to do. Moving beyond the state of Georgia, I think that what we would find is that the state of Florida, while still going to the GOP, would narrow down. Marco Rubio wouldn't be able to work in a 2018 type of environment like he did in 2016. He did well in 2016 because he was able to tap into voters here that were voting for Hillary Clinton as well. 2018 wouldn't have someone like Hillary Clinton on the ballot. And with that, I think that we would see some major concerns from the opposition side, specifically Democrats, with Donald Trump in office, with a negative approval rating of the president, with a generic ballot that is lopsided away from them. Looking at Rick Scott, arguably, if he was in 2016, I think he would have won by a similar amount to Marco Rubio. While Marco Rubio individually has a strong appeal to Hispanic voters, Rick Scott did as well in the past, and he did in 2018. He did better than Donald Trump did amongst Hispanic voters across the state of Florida. Bill Nelson lost because he wasn't able to tap into minority voters the same way Hillary Clinton was. Had he gotten Hillary Clinton's numbers in Miami-Dade County, he would have won the state of Florida, and that's just the reality of it. He would have won, and Democrats would have had an additional Senate seat in the state of Florida, but that simply isn't the case. While I do think the Republicans still would have won with Marco Rubio as the nominee, I do think that it would have gotten narrowed up, but nothing enough to change the actual outcome, which means that the state itself still ends up remaining a lean red state. Moving over to the state of Ohio, I do think Democrats are going to have some trouble, especially working within a state that just voted for Donald Trump by 8 percentage points in 2016 and then would, of course, 2 years later. I think that Sherrod Brown, as the incumbent in 2018, did enough to win the state, but it was still pretty close, especially considering that his opponent didn't exactly treat the race as seriously as one might expect. Looking at the Ohio situation right now, in this type of year, there would be an outgoing Republican incumbent, and I would actually argue that Democrats wouldn't be able to pick it up, but it would still be a closer state than it is currently estimated to be. One thing that I would be pretty solid on is the Democrats winning in Pennsylvania. I think that should be pretty solidified. I also think that, especially with Chris Sununu saying he's not going to run, Kelly Ayotte saying she's not going to run, that New Hampshire would actually end up being likely blue. I think that's a fair estimation at this point. Pennsylvania is a state where I could imagine it as a likely Democratic seat, but keep in mind we are working within a situation where there's an outgoing incumbent. It is possible that it would end up likely blue. That would just need a little bit more fleshing out. Right now, I'm looking at the state as more of a 4 to 5 percent margin of victory, nearing that edge, but there's no guarantee that the Democrats would actually be able to bump it up into the likely column. So for right now, I'm going to characterize it as lean D. So that leaves us with 3 toss-up seats in Nevada, Wisconsin, and the state of North Carolina. Now, it's going to be pretty difficult to figure out whether or not, how many of these remaining states would end up going in a different direction compared to the other. One thing that I do think is that the state of Wisconsin would go blue. While Ron Johnson, as the incumbent, does have that type of advantage, I don't think it's enough to at least solidify his current stance. I think that looking at Scott Walker, he's a perfect example of how someone who might have had good victories in the past could end up losing in a national environment like 2018. The same way Democrats are potentially, and based off my prediction, expected to lose in Arizona, in Nevada, in Georgia, despite these being strong candidates there. The state of Wisconsin, I think, could very well be the same, and I think Ron Johnson could lose the state of Wisconsin in the 2018/2022 national environment. For the state of Nevada, I would actually go to a further extent and say that this state would actually end up being likely blue. I know it might be surprising to see, but I think it's a fair estimation given our current situation. Considering that in 2018 with a Republican incumbent, the Democrats won by a likely margin, I think Catherine Cortez Masto as a Democratic incumbent would perform better than her, mainly because of that incumbency status and also coming from Harry Reid's seat. So for right now, I would actually say the state of Nevada in a 2018 type of environment would end up going likely blue. And at some point, I believe, I actually had the state of Nevada as a likely blue seat and Arizona as a lean blue seat. So it's crazy to think about how, near mid-2021, we were talking about how 2022 could end up being potentially a year like 2018 if Democrats maintain their popularity. But as we know, and as the Democratic Party knows and does too frequently, they lose their advantage, they lose their lead, and lose their popularity nationwide. So the final state that we have to characterize is the state of North Carolina, and this is where it gets a bit tricky. In 2018, had the Democratic Party fielded a candidate in the House elections in North Carolina's 3rd congressional district, it is seemingly evident that the Democratic Party would have won the popular vote across the state of North Carolina in the House elections. Now, even with winning or nearly winning the House popular vote in the state of North Carolina, the Democratic Party still lost in terms of the congressional representation by, I believe, a margin of 10-3. And that's when the gerrymandering was stricken down by the state Supreme Court. They did it actually prior to, but said that this current map could stay in place in time for Election Day. But then for 2020, the Democrats were handed 2 additional House seats out of forced redistricting. Looking at the state's 2020 House election results, what we find is that the Democratic Party does actually win that. But had the Republicans, I believe, fielded a candidate in one of the new districts, the Republicans would have actually won the House popular vote. So it's a bit tricky of a situation. I think given our 2018 national environment, the state of North Carolina very well could have gone blue. And I think looking at the candidate list here, we have Ted Budd versus Sherry Beasley. I think it is possible that the Democratic Party could have won the state of North Carolina by a tilt. And I say a tilt because I am not confident in this prediction. I wouldn't be confident if I characterized it as a Republican seat. It is a state that almost consistently votes for the GOP without fail, but sometimes does waver. And I think this situation, it very well could be. Knowing Sherry Beasley as the former Chief Justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court, who only lost by 0.004%, I believe, across the state. Looking at Ted Budd being someone who's struggling through a primary despite having the Trump endorsement, I also think we're going to see how the endorsement ends up playing out, whether or not Ted Budd ends up becoming that nominee. But I think looking at the House election results from 2018, looking at the national environment, looking at the state's swing relative from 2016, I personally think that if any environment was to be electable for a Democrat in the state of North Carolina, it would be 2018. And I think with this Senate race there, the Democrats would be able to flip it. So the final map here is the state of the final map here is a 53-47 advantage for the Democratic Party. They flipped the states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, and the GOP doesn't flip anything. There are some significant drawbacks for the GOP on this map, for obvious reason. 2018 was not a good year for them, and that's just simply how it is. This is a 3-seat advantage for the Democrats. Essentially, if this was to be implemented now, the Democrats wouldn't have to worry about Kyrsten Sinema or Joe Manchin, but I think that because of where we are, the Democratic Party probably lucked out that this is not their Senate map. The Democrats probably lucked out even still with this Senate map in 2022, because if it was the 2018 map, it would have been much worse, and I think that Democrats are probably happy with where they stand right now with this map than if they were to have some type of hypothetical where they were able to switch the maps from 2018 to 2022. That simply would not roll over well for the Democratic Party, and I think that this map, while seemingly a good result for the Democrats, I think definitely services them better in 2022 than it would have in 2018. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.